because I came down from heaven to carry out the will of the one who sent me, not my own. Pope Francis left behind more than just memories prior to his passing. He left a letter hidden. This long-lost communication, sent to Cardinal Luis Antonio Tagle, has now been made public, igniting speculation around the world. Was it a private farewell or a subliminal message about the Church's future? Francis gave sincere advice inside, along with maybe a clue as to who should take the lead next. How might this letter permanently alter the Catholic Church, and what did the Pope actually see in Tagle? This is going to change everything, so stay with us. Pope Francis' death has been confirmed by the Vatican in breaking news. The Catholic world is in grief just hours after an appearance during the Christian calendar's holiest weekend. Due to a lung infection and double pneumonia, he had been in severe condition. Visit for the most recent information on this breaking story. After Pope Francis passed away, a misplaced letter was discovered. The world grieved the loss of Pope Francis, a leader renowned for his quiet power, humility, and compassion. However, none anticipated what happened next. A letter emerged from deep in the Vatican archives. Pope Francis himself wrote a letter. Not just any letter either. This one was sent to a guy who many think has the power to influence the Catholic Church's future. Luis Antonio Tagle, Cardinal. Rumors of a confidential message from the Pope to Tagle persisted for years. It was lost, according to some. Others thought it didn't exist. However, the truth is now known. According to a Vatican insider, the letter was handwritten, intimate, and full of advice. Why, then, was it concealed? And with Francis gone, why make it public now? The solution may be straightforward. Time. Pope Francis had a reputation for being forward-thinking and constantly considering the future of the Church. Many people think he wanted this letter to show up at the precise moment it did, when the Church most needed guidance. But what is this enigmatic letter really about? There is no official decree. This isn't a formal appointment. It's something far stronger, a manifestation of vision, guidance, and trust. According to early accounts, Pope Francis wrote, "I entrust you to carry forward the spirit of service." That kind of message doesn't just fall silently. The Vatican feels the shock of it. For this was not merely a note of goodwill. It was evident that Pope Francis considered Tagle to be more than just a co-worker. He was the future to him. But how did the Pope come to value Tagle, a modest man from Manila? Let's go back in time and examine the connection that enabled this message. Partnership based on trust. How Francis trained Tagle to be his protégé. You hear the applause if he is powerful enough. It's encouraging. There's going to be someone on that balcony. Naturally, he has been in terrible shape. Here he is after 5 weeks in the hospital. Luis Antonio Tagle was therefore not a product of privilege or power. He was raised in the streets of Manila, where people lived out their beliefs on a daily basis. Not in imposing churches, but in modest deeds of compassion. That's precisely what Pope Francis was interested in. The two men have similar ancestry, humble beginnings, compassion for the underprivileged, and a belief that the Church should walk alongside its members rather than above them. Francis quickly developed a strong respect for Tagle once they first met. The Pope recognized something about Tagle, a leader who pursued meaning more than titles. Francis reportedly once remarked of Tagle, "He leads with his heart, not his rank." That trust only got greater over time. Tagle was nominated by Pope Francis in 2019 to lead the Congregation for the Evangelization of Peoples, one of the Vatican's most significant divisions. It went beyond a promotion. The message to the globe was unmistakable. Francis avoided interacting with politicians. He selected leaders who prioritized compassion over authority, such as clergymen. Tagle became the Pope's go-to person for important occasions, international missions, and delicate church affairs. Before speaking, he listens. "That's uncommon here," said another cardinal. Before long, rumors started to circulate. Was Francis setting the stage for something more significant for Tagle? Perhaps the solution had always been in that misplaced letter. However, what was the content of Pope Francis's message? What teachings and ideas did he leave for Tagle to continue? Since the letter's contents are currently influencing discussions all across the world, let's examine it in more detail. The teachings and vision of Pope Francis for Tegel. Those in attendance knew as soon as the letter was opened. Not all of it was personal. It was a historic event. The letter, written in the recognizable handwriting of Pope Francis, was devoid of directives or orders. It included wisdom which was far more potent. Those who pursue power do not belong in the Church. Francis wrote that it belongs to those who serve. The Pope outlined his vision for Tegel and the future of Catholic leadership in such succinct remarks. He talked about the necessity for a church that listens more than it talks, as well as humility and compassion. A church that welcomes change without losing sight of its history. However, one statement in particular really caught our attention. "Luis, you know what people's hearts want. Don't ever lose that. Leaders with compassion in both hands are needed for the future." It wasn't a clear directive. Tegel was not being named the next pope. But it was obvious. Francis believed that Tegel was destined to lead the Church through these perilous times. The letter also discussed global issues, environmental care, migration, and poverty, issues that were supported by Francis and Tegel during their respective governments. Finally, a silent blessing. May you proceed with trust rather than fear. This letter validates what many have long assumed. Tegel wasn't the only person receiving guidance from Pope Francis. He was getting him ready. One question still stands as the globe reads between the lines. Was this letter a prophecy or a private message? We then examine the term that generated worldwide conjecture. My spirit is in him. Remain with us. The victims of human trafficking, exploitation, abuse, assault, and discrimination. The migrant workers from the Philippines and their families. The people who survived wars and terrible disasters. Catholics who are not Christians. Those who practice non-Christian faiths. The advocates for peace, particularly in our dear Mindanao. And the entire universe that moans. We all want to repeat. Maraming salamat pa, Santo Padre. You carry my spirit is a common way for you to conclude meetings and interactions. The words that caused discussion around the world. Pope Francis talked cautiously for years. Each syllable was measured. Each sentence had a purpose. However, one sentence and one moment have reverberated more than any sermon. My spirit is carried by Tegel. Many initially believed it to be merely a compliment. A pope's warm words to a reliable cardinal. However, those words sound drastically different now that the lost letter has been found. Because it's never just words when a pope says something like that. Cardinal Tegel and Pope Francis had more in common than missions and meetings. They both envisioned a church that welcomes the contemporary world fearlessly, serves, and listens. I see a heart that recognizes God's mission and God's people in Tegel. A trusted advisor was once told by Francis. He had already alluded to something more profound. Observers saw that Francis frequently gave Tegel important roles, subtly increasing his authority behind the scenes. Tegel was always there, whether it was spearheading humanitarian initiatives, speaking out on social justice issues, or representing the Vatican on international stages. And now that the letter has been made public, many people think Francis was always giving hints. Was he suggesting that Tegel would be his spiritual heir? Through mentorship, trust, and times like this, rather than through formal declarations? Politics is not the only thing that drives the Church. Legacy powers it. And with each silent word, Pope Francis might have been forming that legacy. What precisely was Francis requesting of Tegel, though, if this was a genuine spiritual endorsement? Let's examine the letter's hidden meaning and the reasons why scholars think it might change the course of the Church's history. The unspoken message. Was there a spiritual endorsement in this letter? The government, military, police, security personnel, mass media, parishes, and numerous donors who put in countless hours to make your pastoral visit possible. And I say it again. Muchísimas gracias, tant grazie, in the name of every Filipino whose faith you have bolstered in recent days. Many thanks. Salamat pa, maraming. I'm sure a lot of people would like to thank you. Street kids, widows, orphans, homeless people, unofficial settlers, farmers, laborers, and farmers. The letter from Pope Francis to Cardinal Tagle appeared straightforward on paper. No formal titles, no big announcements. Those who have closely examined it, however, disagree, since there is a message hidden inside that only a select few would comprehend. Francis remarked that the Church needs shepherds, not rulers. People who walk beside others rather than in front of them. This was more than just advice to many. It was an appeal to lead in a new way. In selecting a pope, the Catholic Church has always adhered to tradition. Pope Francis, however, was never a guy who was only constrained by custom. Opening doors and dismantling barriers were central to his entire pontificate. This letter felt so significant because of this. It says that you know the path ahead, but it doesn't say that you will become pope. Luis, keep in mind that service is leadership. When the moment comes, follow your heart rather than your desire. The reason those remarks have such power is not because they elevate Tagle, but rather because they set him up. Many Vatican observers now think that Francis used this letter to subtly support a new style of leadership that would continue to uphold his principles even after he is gone. It has nothing to do with politics or power struggles. It was about making sure that the values of humility, compassion, and inclusivity would endure. And Francis's greatest confidant is the ideal person to carry that torch. However, how did Tagle handle such a significant obligation? Let's examine his response since it reveals a lot about the type of leader he is. Tagle's response. Modesty in the face of great authority. Cardinal Luis Antonio Tagle did not hold a press conference after receiving the letter. He made no announcement. He didn't even allude to what was within. He did what he typically does instead. He maintained his modesty. When questioned about the letter, Tagle allegedly told a close friend, "I am just a servant of God." There was only silent contemplation, no lofty gestures, no ambition. That's what makes Tagle unique, and maybe the reason Pope Francis had such faith in him. Such a letter would be interpreted by some as a ticket to power, but for Tagle it served as a reminder of accountability. Being a leader is not about titles. As Tagle once stated in a sermon, it's about bearing the burden of others. After reading the letter, Tagle reportedly prayed for days, asking for direction rather than praise. His response was serene, contemplative, and firmly rooted in faith, exactly what Francis would have wanted. Tagle kept on his work, concentrating on interfaith discussion, humanitarian endeavors, and aiding underprivileged areas, despite the rumors that swirled about him. He reminded his congregation that the Church must always stand behind the people, particularly during difficult times. The letter wasn't about personal fate for Tagle. It had to do with carrying out a mission that both he and Pope Francis supported. But the world is keeping a careful eye on Tagle while he maintains his humility. Because a church is at a crossroads, and this is about more than just one man's response. And if Tagle decides to come forward when called, this letter might signal the start of a new era now that Francis is no longer with us. We then discuss how this letter could not have arrived at a more crucial moment for Tagle and the whole Church. A church at a turning point. Why now more than ever is this letter important? Throughout its 2,000-year existence, the Catholic Church has seen numerous turning points. However, it is currently at one of its most important turning points. A world that is changing quickly, scandals, dwindling membership in Western nations, and rising calls for reform. These are only some of the issues that are upending the Church's basis. And like a lighthouse pointing the way, Pope Francis's misplaced letter to Cardinal Tagle emerges in the midst of this storm. Why, therefore, is this letter so important at this time? Considering that it's more than just words on paper. It represents what the Church might develop into. Pope Francis famously observed that when the Church serves truth and love, it shouldn't be afraid of change. Francis pushed for a church that focused more on building bridges than walls during his time as Pope. He encouraged interfaith dialogue, spoke candidly about the environment, reached out to the underprivileged, and reminded leaders that humility is more powerful than hierarchy. But he was aware that time was running out. Many people therefore think that this letter was more than just Tagle's personal counsel. It served as a guide for navigating the future. There are two forces pulling on the Church. Traditionalists worry that centuries' worth of traditions may be lost. However, Progressives contend that if nothing changes, the church runs the risk of losing its relevance. No one knew this tension better than Francis, and he realized that someone would have to maintain that delicate balance after him. Here comes Cardinal Tagle, a man who represents both progress and tradition. Despite growing up in a strongly Catholic nation, this individual is aware of the challenges of the contemporary world. A man who travels alongside his people rather than leading from above. Francis reportedly told a fellow cardinal that Luis is a good listener and that the church of today must be a listening church. The need for a global, caring leader is becoming more evident as Catholicism grows in places like Africa and Asia and spirituality declines in North America and Europe. For this reason, the timing of the letter couldn't be more ideal or pressing. The church requires guidance. It must be healed. It requires a leader who recognizes that faith is lived out in the streets and in the hardships of common people, not only preserved in old books. And Pope Francis thought that leader might be Tagle. However, not everyone is in agreement because there is always opposition to calls for change. And that's precisely what we will investigate next. How this letter has inspired both dread and optimism inside the Vatican's gates. Opposition as well as support. The emergence of Tagle caused division inside the Vatican. When word of Pope Francis's letter to Cardinal Tagle leaked through the Vatican's hallways, it sparked a silent storm rather than merely a glimmer of optimism. Because although many people view Tagle as a representation of progress and kindness, others perceive something much more disturbing. Change. And too much change, too quickly, is something that some Vatican factions are afraid of. According to one senior Vatican expert, Tagle symbolizes a different future. Not everyone is prepared for that, either. To be clear, Tagle has a large following. Millions of Catholics in Asia, Africa, and Latin America see him as the logical next step in Pope Francis's program, as do progressive cardinals and younger clergy. A leader who maintains their religion while acknowledging the difficulties of the modern world. He addresses the populace. He is aware of suffering. We need that kind of leadership right now, a Kenyan bishop stated. However, traditionalist elements within the church are uncomfortable behind closed doors. They see Tagle's candor, emphasis on inclusivity, interfaith discussion, and handling of social issues like migration and climate change as a departure from tradition. Others worry that his ascent would bring about reforms they have long opposed. According to an unnamed Vatican source, we must defend the Church's eternal teachings rather than follow the whims of contemporary culture. This is not a new division. During his pontificate, Pope Francis himself was subject to similar criticism. However, the discussion about the Church's future has only gotten more heated since Francis left. Despite not formally designating Tagle as his successor, the letter has frightened his detractors and given his supporters more confidence. Insiders say it prompted early talks about the next conclave, as well as secret meetings and potential alliances. In an effort to move the church back toward conservative principles, some cardinals are supporting more conventional candidates. Others secretly think that the only way forward is to follow Francis's and possibly Tagle's path. But Tagle doesn't say anything. He consistently lets his deeds speak louder than his words. When questioned about his future, Tagle once remarked, "I serve where I'm called." The church is currently split between those who are holding on to the past and those who are working toward a more inclusive future. A letter, a little piece of paper bearing the weight of 1 billion dreams and concerns, is at the heart of it all. For years to come, the Catholic Church may be redefined by what occurs next. But there's no denying that Tagle's name will endure. Next, we look at what his leadership would imply for millions of people worldwide if he actually assumes the position that many people think Pope Francis subtly shaped him for. Keep an eye out. What millions might gain from Tagle's leadership. The effects will extend beyond the doors of the Vatican if Cardinal Luis Antonio Tagle assumes a more prominent role, either as the official pope or as the driving force behind church changes. The world will be affected. Why? For Tagle is more than just a church leader. He represents the people. According to Tagle, faith needs to be present in people's lives, in their hopes and hardships. What might a Tagle-shaped church look like then? It would be more inclusive to start. Tagle has often underlined the need for the church to extend its reach to underprivileged individuals, underrepresented groups, and youth seeking purpose in a complex world. His approach to leadership is based on listening. True leadership, according to Tagle, begins with comprehending individuals who feel ignored, in contrast to traditional leaders who frequently preach from above. Numerous changes to the church and its image will be part of his legacy, including his historic apologies to survivors of sexual abuse, his efforts to foster unity, and his response to the climate catastrophe. He battled a protracted asthmatic respiratory crisis during his final days at Rome's Gemelli Hospital, where he also received treatment for pneumonia and a complicated lung infection. After tests revealed low platelet counts, which are necessary for clotting, he had undergone blood transfusions. Brett McLeod of 9 kicks off our coverage of this shocking development. His papacy was a papacy of firsts, but 265 popes had preceded him. The first Jesuit to hold the position, the first pope from the Americas, and the first pope from the Southern Hemisphere. The son of Italian refugees who fled fascist Italy, Jorge Mario Bergoglio was born in Buenos Aires in 1936. His dad was a railroad worker. He had always been a fighter. He had to have a portion of his lung removed at the age of 21 due to an infection. Jorge earned his chemical technician degree. Before deciding to become a priest, he worked as a bar bouncer and a cleaner. In 1969, he was ordained. He was appointed Buenos Aires Archbishop. Additionally, Pope John Paul II appointed him a cardinal in 2001. He served in a number of important administrative roles until being elected by his fellow cardinals in 2013 at the age of 76 to head the 1.3 billion Catholics worldwide. In 2023, he told a group of young people that the Church must not only speak but also listen to the cry of the times. Second, anticipate a greater emphasis on social justice. Tagle has always supported tackling global issues including migration and climate change, as well as combating poverty and protecting human rights. He has demonstrated that religious leaders are not required to remain mute about matters of the world. Rather, they can serve as a moral compass for both societies and governments. The Church might become a more active force under Tagle's influence, assisting not only souls but also lives. His dedication to interfaith discussion is another. Tagle's capacity to create connections between religions may offer a new sense of harmony and peace in a world when politics and religion are dividing people more and more, not to mention the young people. Tagle is aware that involving younger generations, who frequently feel alienated, is essential to the Church's future. He has already established the foundation for a church that feels more approachable and sensitive to contemporary society by utilizing social media and planning youth-led projects. However, there are difficulties with such a vision. It's not easy to strike a balance between tradition and advancement, deal with internal opposition, and lead more than 1 billion Catholics through uncertain times. However, the man Pope Francis trusted the most is the one best suited for that mission. Tagle may not have been formally named the next pope by the lost letter, but it has unquestionably made him a ray of hope for a church that needs to be revitalized. And that leads us to the last query. Was it anything more significant? Or did Pope Francis subtly influence the future of the Church with a single letter? A spiritual legacy that will shape future generations? Let's wrap up this tale by determining the actual significance of Pope Francis's parting remarks. Did Pope Francis use one to subtly influence the future? Assuming the name of Francis, the poor man's benefactor and animal patron saint, he established the mood early. He declined a ride in the papal limousine on the night of his election, taking a bus back to his hotel instead. He said, "I can't live here, I would die," and opted to stay in a modest apartment rather than the much bigger official palace. I need people. Pope Francis preferred the common touch over the opulent regalia of his predecessors. Because of this man's ability to communicate with everyone in a straightforward manner, I believe that many people who had previously been quite far away from the Church came back. His goal was to change the Catholic Church's historically conservative reputation. He raised his voice,